Hello from the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm your host, Sarah Scudder. I've spent my career in the print and marketing procurement space. I run RSN, a print sourcing tool software company. Our tool provides an innovative and painless way for procurement execs and marketers to buy high quality print and packaging for less. Companies that prosper in 2021 will excel at spend optimization, which can be defined as reducing non-strategic costs, while simultaneously investing more in areas that will drive revenue and profit growth. RSN is hosting a series of virtual panel discussions that will help procurement professionals master the art of print spend optimization. Each session in our series will address a single type of print spending, and each will feature panelists that have extensive experience with that print spend category. Our session today is discussing packaging. Next week, we are talking about labels, and week 3, we are talking about content marketing services. Spending on packaging is expected to reach $1.05 trillion by 2024, driven by the explosive growth of online shopping. I can tell you that I'm definitely a contributor to that, and the adoption of direct-to-consumer business models. Meanwhile, consumers are increasingly demanding that businesses use packaging that is environmentally sustainable. This session will explore the opportunities and challenges that define the future of packaging. And before we kick off our panel, I want to just share a couple of my most recent purchases. I love fashion. I used to do runway modeling, and I'm obsessed with several different designers, so I buy a lot online. This is a Ted Baker purchase that I received actually from my girlfriend Sashi. And you can see it's totally branded Ted Baker with the green. And they actually even have printed here to make it look like it's a male piece. Freebirds is one of my favorite shoe brands, and they are obsessed with packaging and making everything branded. So every aspect of their outside packaging piece is branded. Then their shoe boxes are again branded on every side of the box. And then my most random purchase is this spacesuit from a startup that I bought so I can travel on planes during COVID. And you can see here is the back of the box. The box is almost bigger than me. And it talks about all the different components of my spacesuit outfit. So I buy a lot of things online, and I always like to collect and look at the different packaging that I receive. So with that, we're going to kick off our panel discussion today. We have an incredible group of experts, all who have very different backgrounds in the packaging space. So I'm going to have Leanne kick us off today. And Leanne, I'm going to ask you your first question. And then before you answer, if you could introduce yourself to us today. So my question for you is, a lot of people don't have experience buying packaging, and it can be really kind of scary and cumbersome, and people don't know even how to start. So what do you look for when selecting a supplier?
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me. So my name is Leanne Shear. I have over 20 years of experience in supply chain and procurement. And I would say when it comes to procuring packaging, you need to look at the entire supply chain in terms of packaging spend optimization, right? It's not just about reducing spend. You got to look at how your packaging is going to affect your entire supply chain. So you have to look at vendors that are flexible, vendors that are innovative, sustainable, and are willing to work with you.
Leanne, do you have a specific example that you could share from something in your career where you were working through trying to select a packaging supplier?
Yes, many times. So Um, Easily off the top of my head, one of the companies I worked for was a golf company. And, golf balls, you're selling a $50 dozen of golf balls. So packaging is very important. Part of that, you try to work with a vendor to find, your cost benefit, right? If you go with a 0.16 paper versus a 0.18, you may see the dimples come through the packaging and it destroys your $50 golf balls. And so you work with them on pricing, on design, working with them on how it will work on the manufacturing line, how many units you can put in per carton, per pallet, per container, because you have to look at pricing all the way to how you're going to pay this for freight.
Leanne, some people who are joining our session today might not have a lot of experience sourcing packaging. They may source many, many different categories, and some of the terminology that you just used, people may not even be familiar with. How did you, when you started sourcing packaging for the first time in your career, how did you learn about the industry, all the different terminology? Because that could be really overwhelming to someone.
Oh, sure. So, when you're selecting a vendor, a really important aspect of vendor selection is finding someone that has that technical know-how. And so during an RFP process, you'll talk to the different vendors, and there are vendors that will educate you through the process, and you'll quickly find out who your best partner is. Typically they're the ones that are willing to do the trial and errors. They're willing to come out to your factory to run the different types of packaging. They're the ones that will hold your hand through the process and advise you on what's right. And so through years and working with really good vendors, you do tend to pick up on the terminologies.
And Leanne, you mentioned running an RFP. What tip or advice do you have for the group that is something that you think is really important to include, in particular for a packaging RFP, that maybe isn't important when you're sourcing other types of spend?
Sure. Well, for packaging, you want to, again, work with a vendor that's known for their flexibility, innovation. You're also looking for sustainability. That's huge in the packaging world, or just in general right now. Also, location. People typically don't think about location. I believe that when you're talking about packaging, you're trying to minimize that cost as much as possible. So instead of sourcing from, if your vendor is in Taiwan, you have a packaging vendor in China, you may want to consider that Taiwanese vendor, because you might be able to do something more lean. You could do like a Kanban system where, your tier 1 vendor calls a tier 2 packaging vendor and pulls as needed. And so there are various ways to look at cost reductions and selecting your vendors. We could go on and on for hours, I'm sure.
Yeah, Leanne, I am glad you brought up the overseas piece. I think Mark's going to talk a little bit about that later. Some of the challenges and issues that can also be associated with sourcing, for instance, from China. So, Leanne, thank you for that, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Next, Tim. So Tim had a laptop crash and he still made it. So kudos to you and your IT team. I know how that goes. I had a meeting earlier this week and someone had a laptop crash. So I think it's in the air. So Tim, I'm going to ask you your first question for the panel today. And before you answer it, if you could introduce yourself. I think your background is really interesting, how you're on the manufacturer side and you've spent most of your career in the packaging space. So please don't forget to do a little intro. So Tim, my question for you is, when planning a company's new test market product launch, where are the opportunities for brands to maximize these efforts while minimizing the costs associated with these tests through the use of digitally printed flexible packaging? And I know that doing testing is really, really big and kind of a hot topic because so many companies have now shifted to online ordering and they're trying to roll out, new products as quickly as they can.
Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you for having me, Sarah. My name is Tim Aegis. I've been involved in traditional flexible packaging for over 30 years now. And in the middle of 2019, I connected with a very successful commercial printing company led by Tom O'Brien, who does a lot of work on the commercial and dye sublimation, and he wanted to diversify his business. Long story short, he and I put together a plan later in 2019 to a business plan that we sold to his bank. We sold to the state of North Carolina, and in January of 2020, we began the construction of a new building on the back of the property to house a standalone flexible packaging operation. About 30 days later, COVID hit, and with that, there was a slowdown of everything involved with that project. So long story short, we're here today, several months behind schedule, but we've been up and operational for about 7 months now. And again, it is built around an HP Indigo 20,000 press that's really focused on high quality printing, short run, and to support that, the downstream equipment we have allows us to coat over our printing a FDA certified coating, which we then take and either can slit into roll stock or finish pouches. The digital printing process allows you, one, as I said, to really focus on short runs, but to do things like this, where you can run 3 copies side by side all at once and not have to invest in all the printing plates or potentially rotogravure cylinders that a traditional flexible packaging house would have to do. So again, short runs, multiple copies at the same time to test either design changes or maybe structure changes as well. So I think that's sort of the value we bring to the market. That's our MO, as we say, and we've done a lot of work recently in the area of sustainability, which I think our first speaker had spoke about as well.
Tim, let's say we have someone who has never done a new market launch before, so it's not something they've even managed or dealt with. What advice do you have for somebody who's just getting started trying to test out either products for the first time or making a shift or pivot in their product line?
Oh boy, it seems like we're doing that every day. It's just a lot of upfront discussion in terms of what's your product, how is it going to be packaged, what type of barrier properties are needed. Let's work on the sizing. We have a multiple portfolio of pre-printed, just unprinted sample pouches that we can supply customers to say, okay, how's the product going to fit in? But it honestly, sir, it's a lot of upfront discussion and talk. And again, I think you touched on it earlier with the first speaker, is that oftentimes you're talking a language that the person on the other end has never heard before.
We have a question that has come in from the audience, and I want to encourage all of those of you that are live with us today to use the Q&A function. We've got a really diverse group of packaging experts here, so we want to leverage their knowledge as much as possible throughout the hour. So feel free to submit your questions. I will ask those throughout the session. We also have a chat, so feel free to engage, post fun comments. Brandon will be managing that chat for us today. Brandon's also in the corner in the cool metal bow tie. He works on the marketing team here at RSN, and he'll be managing all the tech. So if you have any specific tech questions, you can put it in the chat and he will handle and address those. So we've already got some questions coming in from the audience. So Deb and Leanne, I want to ask this to both of you first, since you are on the buy side. The question is, what certifications should we be looking for our packaging suppliers? So Deb, I'll ask you that first, if there's anything in particular throughout your extensive career in packaging as a buyer that you've really focused on or think is really important for people to prioritize.
So in terms of certifications, for medical or for food applications, you want to look for someone who is, for like food, has certified to the Safe Quality Food or the Global Food Safety Initiative. You can find them online. You know, I don't know if we're going to post links later, but we could do that. But you want to, things that are really important to be certified in is food, medical, and some mil-spec stuff. The rest of it, you just want to deal with, suppliers that are going to be here tomorrow. Like your corrugate boxes, there's probably not a lot of certifications running around out there for them. Does that make sense? Can't hear you.
Leanne, anything from your perspective when you were heavily sourcing packaging? The example that he asked in his question was in particular around an FSC or ISO certification.
Yes. So when it comes to relaying to your customer that you are eco-friendly and being conscious, something like an FSC would be good to get onto your packaging. And that just basically means that you're using a sustainable company in terms of how they forest and how they gather their paper. In the past, and maybe even right now, there were vendors, packaging paper vendors that would not replant the trees. And so they would do a lot of damage to places like the rainforest and even the animals that live in the rainforest. And so there are companies that are known for that. So when you do talk about impressing your consumers and letting them know that you're corporately responsible, I think something like FSC shows that, hey, we are trying to do our part to make sure to keep this sustainable.
And Leanne, did you focus on any ISO certifications like color or quality management certifications when you were sourcing packaging? Was that a priority for you?
We would do press checks, not necessarily ISO. Some of the companies don't invest in ISO. I do believe, it's important to keep your processes and procedures in check. But when it comes to making sure your print is consistent, every run there's a print check.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, next up we have Mark. I think, Mark, the last time I saw you was in New York almost 2 years ago. So thanks for being with us today. Love the packaging and the background. So way to represent with the boxes. So Mark, again, I'll have you introduce yourself before you answer your first questions. You can talk to us a little bit about your background and extensive experience in the packaging space. And then my question for you is around something that Leanne mentioned in her topic about location and why it's really important to think about the location, about where you're sourcing your packaging from. So my question is, many companies have been importing packaging and components from China. Since inbound freight costs have skyrocketed, lead times have also extended, and tariffs are still in place, where can companies go to import high quality packaging and packaging components at aggressive prices with still having reasonable lead times? I know one of the things that I immediately think of if I have to source from China is, oh, it's going to take too long. And Mark, you're on mute, so you want to unmute?
Sorry about that. Good to see you again as well. Sarah, as you know, last time we met in person, I had short hair and I didn't have a gray beard. So obviously things have changed significantly during the pandemic times, as has business. Your question is really good. Each of the factors that you laid out separately.
So Mark, before you do that, can you introduce yourself? Talk to us a little bit about your background and what you're doing in the packaging space.
Sure. So my background is 27 years in the world of procurement. The last 12, I've focused almost exclusively in the areas of packaging. What I realized 12 years ago was people who produce packaging and sell packaging understand it in most cases a lot better than the people who buy packaging. And as a procurement professional, that led me to believe that there was this great imbalance and an opportunity that really favored the supplier rather than the buyer. So about 12 years ago, I started developing should cost target price models for different packaging categories like corrugated and flexible films. And I had the mind that if I could put together a team that all comes out of the packaging industry and combine that with procurement professionals, we would be able to add a unique set of value to clients. So 5 years ago is when I launched my company, Anteris Consulting Group. And I have on my team, I'm actually the only non-packaging industry veteran. I have 5 core team members who have at least 20 to 30 years on average of experience in flexibles, in corrugated, in technical design, in packaging engineering. And so by that, we're able to put together really expertise in terms of the manufacturing and the costing and bring that to the buyers. So that was the whole thesis behind the business. And we've been doing that successfully now for 5 years. So to your question earlier, which is really fascinating, the points that you mentioned, lead times, pricing, quality, freight, any one of those things happening at one time is troubling. All of them are happening at the same time. This is really potentially nightmarish for people who buy suppliers. So one of the things that my team and I started thinking about, 4 years ago when the tariffs started to come to fruition was how could we look for new countries, new sources that are not well known at that time, but where we could kind of cultivate and develop supplier relationships and knowledge of supplier markets so that we could avoid the tariffs. Well, that was very prescient at the time, only because now we have COVID, and now it's a real reality that people have to find new sources of supply. Let me give you a quick example of what's going on that we're really seeing every day in terms of delays, in terms of freight. We have clients buying FIBCs, super sacks, the giant woven polypropylene bags. That used to be a 90-day product. Right now, even major buyers are out 6 months. The freight now is it's almost double what it once was. That's all being passed through. We've got another client that buys trigger sprayers, the things that go on top of these bottles. Stock trigger sprayers out of China used to be 6 weeks, 8 weeks. We have clients that are out 5 months right now. We have big box retailers that are on allocation. That's how bad it is. So what we're doing is focusing on finding, the next available countries that have great capabilities. And 3 areas where we've been, I think, very successful is South America. We work extensively in Colombia. We found suppliers in Colombia that are outstanding with flexible packaging, pouches that are coming in with as good quality, with better lead times, 4-week turnaround shipping, and also better pricing. So we're getting China pricing in South America right now. Clients are loving this. These bottles right now, and along with the spray triggers, these are very expensive. A lot of them have been coming from Asia. So we've now expanded our reach into the country of Turkey. Yes, Turkey. Not many people know Turkey as a packaging hub, but we are finding tremendous opportunities in rigid plastic packaging, bottles, pumps, sprayers, HDPE bottles, and we are finding a great deal of success there. And then lastly, I would say to a lesser extent, India. India was ravaged by COVID, but a lot of product is still moving to India. So our goal has been look for new sources, find high quality sources, make sure they're qualified, do the trials like our previous speakers have said, and then cash in on the better pricing and the better terms and the better delivery capabilities.
So Mark, for those who don't know in the room, what is flexible packaging?
Well, flexible packaging, what Tim showed, Tim, if you wouldn't mind raising that up one more time. Flexible packaging is basically made from converted film. So it would be in your store now like a pouch. So something like this, right? This is an example of a pouch that we just got out of Colombia. It holds a custom blended organic fertilizer. It's about 42 ounces of product. It's a very complicated pouch to manufacture. It's got a special fitment on the top. So that's an example of flexible packaging. And rigid packaging would be something like this: a bottle, a jar, a tub, a pail, something like that.
Mark, you mentioned these news sources overseas, and Tim, I'm gonna bring you into the conversation as well. So, how would somebody even go about figuring out how to source things outside of China? So a lot of people have supply chains established and built in China. They may have absolutely no contacts in India, no contacts in Turkey. Like, how would someone even get started figuring out how to do that?
They go to people like Mark and his company who has the contacts overseas.
Yeah, so Mark, I'll let you answer that first. And then Tim, I'm going to bring you into the conversation to talk a little bit about some of the benefits sourcing locally versus overseas.
Yeah, so again, to Tim's point, obviously overseas is a portion of the total supply. We're not in any way advocating only buy things from overseas. So Tim is right. There is a big opportunity in America. But for certain categories with certain characteristics, overseas has proven to be a very cost-effective, quality-effective source. So we do basically three things. We go to packaging trade shows. We stay in touch with people that we meet. Number two is we work with, in many cases, U.S. arms of global companies that have U.S. offices and get to know people from those offices. And also we just work our network. So for example, I've been involved in a deal that has nothing to do with packaging. It has to do with something called hypochlorous acid, which is a COVID killing spray, EPA approved. And through our discovery in that area, that was in Turkey, we were able to identify all these great suppliers. And so it's just, our team devotes a significant amount of time to the supplier development and supplier discovery process. So I wish I could be more specific. It's just a concerted effort to survey, find out where people are getting from, meet people at trade shows, ask around, and then qualify.
Yeah, and Mark, I think you and Deb both do a lot of consulting in the packaging space, and I think it highlights some of the benefits for companies working with a packaging consultant who has all of that expertise and the network where if you're just touching packaging as one of your 10 categories at a company, you may not have that breadth of knowledge. Yeah. Tim, how can someone determine whether they should source something locally versus overseas? Because people may come to you and have no idea.
Well, I think the advantage of locally is normally, especially in the digital arena, you're going to get a faster turnaround. And the advantage of digitally produced flexible packaging is, again, a short turnaround, multiple SKUs, varied copies. If the project really takes off and the consumer or the consumer products company decides to go national, where you're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of the units of product, to me, that's where that transition more to the kind of companies that Mark could bring to the table in terms of overseas. But there's good companies in America that'll do it as well. But again, there are cost-saving advantages oftentimes when you're producing a product overseas.
Yeah. We have a question come in from the audience, Mark, for you. The question is, what are the top changes that you faced while approving overseas suppliers during COVID-19 travel restrictions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so as everybody knows, and I'm sure everybody in this table and in this audience are well aware, travel is at a virtual, at least for most of us, at a virtual standstill. So I can't get to Colombia. I can't get to many of these locations. So that's the importance for us of having a network and having people who have other people on the ground in those countries, which we prefer. That said, that does that qualifying of international suppliers is so long as we have a track record with them and we can qualify them by who they supply. So for example, this supplier that we've been doing, that our clients have been doing business with in Colombia, they're Walmart qualified. So in certain business, in the old consulting world, we call that credentialization, meaning if they're good enough to supply Walmart, generally speaking, they're going to be good enough to supply. Now that said, it takes a little bit longer. We have to get samples. We have to get ink drawdowns. We have to do the same things that you would do normally in the US. It's just, it takes longer to do it. But we go through, for example, first run testing. We go through second run testing. We do more testing to make sure that nothing's wrong with the product. But again, it comes down to who are you working with? What's their reputation? What have you done with them before? Who do they supply currently? Check the references, check all these things. And if they're working with a Walmart or a CVS, then it gives us a pretty good level of comfort that they're worth pursuing.
So Mark, I'll have to let you borrow my spacesuit. So this is the thing I just got to wear traveling. I haven't worn it to the airport yet, but it's a startup out of Canada. And I bought it in July and just got it. They did like a GoFundMe Kickstarter. So
Yeah.
I'll have to send it your way. Then maybe you'll be able to travel sooner than expected.
My guess is that if you sent that to me, my children would take it and I would never see it again. So, but yes, thank you. We're just looking forward to the day that we can be back on site and visiting suppliers. Just unfortunately, we all have to make do the best we can.
Tim, before I have Deb introduce herself and ask her a question, we have another question for you about the peel strength for the pouches that you showed.
Those pouches that I did show, they're actually bio-based. The top layer is a cellophane-based material, and it's laminated with a compostable adhesive. And the bottom layer is again, a bio-based resin, meaning it's made from plant waste, corn stalks, potato skins, etc. It does seal differently than your traditional polyethylene bags that you have out in the marketplace today. So to be honest with you, there was a little bit of a learning curve on our pouch machine as we attempted several times to get it to work properly. And actually, we've gotten to the point where we've got a bio-based zipper that has been added and sealed to the inside. It's a press to close bio-based zipper that's available in the marketplace. Again, the structures seal temperatures are different. They're lower than a typical polyethylene. And if you start out with a typical polyethylene seal temperatures, you'll burn the structure or scorch it.
So Tim, we've got some more questions coming in for you and Mark and Deb. Feel free to hop in as well. Some questions about flexible packaging. And the question is, Sarah, great name, by the way, with the H, very key. The question is bio-based flexible packaging child resistant? To my knowledge, it is not yet compatible. So I'll open that up to Deb, Tim, or Mark if any of you have some knowledge about the bio-based flexible packaging being child resistant.
Tim, I'll defer to you on that. It sounds like that's right up here.
We tried to make a pouch with the child resistant zipper, and the child resistant zipper is made out of polyethylene. It's very thick for child resistance. And we failed. We have not to this date been able to get it to successfully seal to the current bio-based films that we've been working with. So the short answer is no. Sorry.
And Sarah, feel free to reach out to Tim on LinkedIn or in the chat function if you want to have some further conversations with him about that. All right, next up we have Deb. My last trip of 2020 was going to Atlanta to host an event, and Deb spoke at my event. So nice to see you again, Deb. Thanks for being with us. If you could introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your extensive background in the packaging space. And then my question for you is, being that you have been on the buy side, you've worked for manufacturers, now you're doing consulting. What are the biggest challenges that your clients are experiencing currently in regards to packaging?
Well, thank you for having me here, Sarah. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and see everybody again. It's nice. I'm Deb Dahlman. I have about 30 years of print and packaging experience. I started out in commercial printing on the sales side, got sucked into the procurement side on accident about 25 years ago when I was working for a company that Donnelly owned, and they asked me to do a data dump about printing on the procurement manager and over lunch, everything I knew about printing over lunch. So that didn't work out and ended up being the procurement guy or gal. So anyway, I've been on the distribution side. I worked for Unisource before it was Veritiv, worked for corrugate manufacturers like Pratt, and I've worked for end users, that consume that stuff. And now I have my own consulting business, been a couple of years now, I've been doing that. It's lots of fun and I'm pretty busy. And the main challenges my clients are facing, which I think probably everyone on this call is facing, if you're importing things, we're struggling with port congestion. Like the ports on the West Coast are backed up. I had a client they've had a container sitting in the port since before Christmas, and they're super frustrated because their packaging is just right there. It's cute packaging. Can you see that? Cute little tins. We did tins.
Looks great.
So, yeah, they're gorgeous. But they're sitting just offshore, so they've had to air freight stuff in, and they're getting a little frustrated with that. So pro tip, New Orleans is relatively empty right now. So if you have the time to go, you have to go through the canal, so you have to add a little bit of extra time for the float time. But on the other hand, they get into port, they're offloaded in the usual, 2 to 3 days. So that's just right now. So, things could change, but just FYI. The other thing, corrugate lead times. The minute COVID hit, suddenly online shopping just took off, and everybody and their brothers buying stuff. You showed it, Sarah. We're all buying stuff coming in our corrugate, and corrugate is getting harder and harder. Board is getting harder and harder to find. So the lead times have gone out. And then, of course, we have work stoppages. All kinds of, manufacturing is, having problems with COVID. So you get a COVID case, you got to stop, you got to quarantine your guys. If you're lucky, you have a second shift that you can put on instead. But it's been a challenge. So those are the things that are happening right now.
So Deb, we've got a question in from the audience for you, and then Mark, I'll let you add anything as well. The question is, as freight cost is increasing, can we still expect the lowest total landed cost if we buy packaging from low-cost countries?
Yes and no. Actually, I've had a lot of success onshoring things that were purchased offshore. Some packaging, like these tins, you cannot beat the cost over there. And even with the increased freight, it was still cheaper than any manufacturer I could find here in the US. But on the other hand, if you're sourcing like plastic injection molded parts, you can onshore those pretty well. You still buy the molding over in China, but you can do them here. So in terms of thermoforming, there's a good import market in the thermoformed, clamshells for tomatoes, grapes, the stuff you find in the stores holding your produce, but you can also buy those onshore, and they cost a little bit more money per unit, but on the other hand, you've saved all that freight import cost. So
I think to Deb's point, it really depends on the category, right? Mm-hmm. So I think what Deb did was laid out a great examples of where onshore and offshore decisions are made. Really, they're driven by what it is that you're buying. So for example, I agree 100% on all those things that you mentioned. So take another one, corrugated, right? Corrugated is like a 3 to 4 hour radius business. So corrugated, no matter what people tell you, is a local business. So generally speaking, the trick is find a good supplier with good capacity locally. However, now when you start to get into a lot of these take-home mailers, something that looks like this, right, where you can fill a container up with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them. There are certain rare opportunities where that may make sense to look at overseas. But I think generally speaking, corrugated onshore, to Deb's point, tins, I think a lot of cases, bottles like this, offshore still beats it from a net landed cost. Now, obviously wanting to avoid high tariff countries, which is another trick, but yes.
All right, Deb, thank you. Tim, I'm gonna switch the conversation back over to you now. I want to talk a little bit about digital printing. Where are short-run, digitally printed, flexible packaging options a good fit in the marketplace for customers? And where can this approach be used to optimize a company's spend?
Well, where we see it being used and will continue to be used when companies want to launch a new product or in a new region, and the graphic team puts the design together and they've got several options they want to look at. In terms of printing, you can print these all at the same time in a digital printing press, supply very small quantities to the marketing sales team, do some consumer test, even put a few of these out in the marketplace, and then really see which of the 3 copies, which of the 6 copies make most sense, and which really resonates with the consumer, which is the one that's going to jump off the shelf. The consumer is going to put their hand on it, put it in their basket and walk away. Those 3 pouches I showed you earlier, those were all printed at the same time, side by side through the digital press. Now, put them out, fill them with the same product, put them in the market, or do your market test, do your market study, consumer reviews, and say, you know what? This is the one that's really going to sell. That's the one we'll go to the next step with. That small trial, the small startup. That's the benefit of digital printing, we believe.
Mm-hmm. Tim, it seems like you do quite a bit in the cannabis space. Is it fair to say that cannabis is one of the biggest consumers of packaging? I mean, it seems like that's a big part of your business.
To date, again, we've only been commercially operational about 7 months now.
Uh-huh.
And probably 60 to 70% of what we've done to date has been in that arena. And why? It's a lot of brands that are local to each state. And it's a lot of new flavors, and it's a lot of new, and these people are all learning about cannabis and the different things they can bring to the market. So, and they're all short runs. Nobody is distributing cannabis nationally with one brand. When that is legalized at some point, and we believe it will be, you'll see people like Unilever and Procter & Gamble, if I can say their names on, they'll all get involved and it'll be national. And then the short runs that I'm doing today will go to the long run houses that I used to work in. But anyway.
Hey, Tim, I live in the Bay Area. We're very pro cannabis here.
I know that.
we're one of the early adopters for sure. Yes. Mark, another point over to you about the digital printing in general. What have you seen has been the impact of digital printing in the packaging space?
Well, I think Tim hit a number of the key points. So what I'll try to do is, if I could, maybe a couple different thoughts that are building on what he said. Let me kind of confine it to corrugated, right? Because I think that's a little different from what Tim's working on. So in the past, if you wanted to do a short run in corrugated, you had to get a print plate, right? And that's amortized over the run size. So short run corrugated, right? Digitally printed, very expensive. Well,
and Mark, can you explain to the room what does corrugated mean, or show us the example again?
Corrugated box, a box, something that looks like that. Okay. So corrugated paper box. What we've seen in the last couple of years, particularly, the improvement in speed and quality of the digital printers has been, I think, something almost like staggering. So let me give you a great example. We did a project for a company that makes fresh bagged vegetables and bagged salads in California, in the central coast.
Yeah, California.
I've got a whole team in California for this, but they were buying, I think, something like $16.5 million a year, and they were getting it printed flexigraphically, okay? And we believed that given the advent and the advancement in digital, that we wanted to bring in as part of our sourcing and bid process some digital suppliers. It turned out that 2 suppliers on a digital basis actually beat the price of the Flexo, which was tremendous. And more importantly, and this is the first time I've ever seen this happen, when they did press runs and they did samples and printed samples, the client realized that they weren't even getting the correct colors from their incumbent. In other words, the digital printing was so easy to reproduce and it didn't require ink drawdowns that they saw colors that they didn't even realize they weren't getting. And so it was eye-opening, to say the least. So we think for companies that are getting started, at companies that are supplementing their regular core products with some seasonal products, we think that suppliers that have digital capabilities are one that should be certainly highly considered in their sourcing and supply base issues.
Really interesting point, Mark, about the quality piece. It's not something you would necessarily think about in that situation.
We didn't, and it was surprising, and it was revelatory.
Yeah. Leanne, I want to switch the conversation back over to you, since you are our procurement practitioner, kind of buy-side hat, along with Deb on the panel. How does someone determine the correct packaging price? And then that seems like a very kind of broad question, but it's really important for somebody who is getting into packaging or hasn't bought a lot of packaging. How do you even know where to start in regards to pricing?
Yeah, well, first of all, you have to do a thorough RFP, but also part of this whole spend optimization for packaging, you have to look at the entire picture, right? You can't just say, I'm in procurement, I'm just going to buy the packaging and punt it to supply chain or engineering. You have to work with your team internally, right? So that means your marketing folks, your designers, your engineering, your QA, your shipping, the entire team to talk about your cost benefit. So even if procurement negotiates the best deal for packaging, while you're running it on the production line, you could find that that specific material isn't good for what you need. Or during shipping, it crumbles at the corner. And so through a process of trial and error, you understand what your real need is for your company, and you kind of land not what procurement wants, but what's best for the company. Sorry, you're on mute.
Along those lines, you mentioned about the piece where you could have everything produced and it looks great, but then you get it to the shipping phase and things happen. So talk to us about optimizing freight in regards to palletizing and getting the product to the end destination.
Sure. So it's still part of the RFP process. You work with them and you kind of give them your requirements of, hey, this is how many boxes or how much of the products you feel should be in a carton. This is how many cartons you expect to be on a pallet. And this is how much you want for a container. So I'm talking about various products you just said, a broad spectrum, but you kind of want to give them that specification as part of your RFP. There are some odd shaped products that are not efficient when it goes on the pallet. You know what I'm talking about, Mark? I sent one to Mark not too long ago. It just, I don't know how you make that work, but there are some where you work with a packaging vendor and they'll come back to you and say, hey, you know what, if you minimize it by this way, or if you guys pack it out this way, you can get more into a carton or more onto a pallet or onto a container for that matter. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, Deb, anything you want to add from your perspective about determining the correct price or controlling costs and lead times? You're on mute.
I have 3 screens, so trying to get my cursor on the right one is difficult for me. Yeah, I would say, especially when you're talking about packaging that can be different sizes, can have different prints on it, that using a common denominator to try to understand what your cost is. So for flexible plastic-based packaging, resin-based, calculate it by the pound, right? Figure out how much it weighs, and you can then look at the weight of each thing and figure out where you're paying, way more for this one and way less for that one, and come to what you think the price per pound should be. Same thing with corrugate. You can change it to MSF. So that's 1,000 square feet. That's how all the producers think of it. They think of their corrugate in terms of 1,000 square feet. So if you convert everything so you have a list of 25 corrugate boxes and you don't know if you're paying a good price or a bad price because they're all different sizes. But if you convert them all to MSF and then price them per MSF, then you can see the ones that are outlined that you need to go renegotiate, the ones that are really, really cheap that you never want to just leave that alone. Don't mention it to your supplier, and you can also come up with a should cost per MSF or per pound for each of your product types. So then you can start driving to that.
Mm-hmm. And Deb, again, I think it highlights one of the benefits of working with somebody like you or Mark, or someone who really has some expertise in the packaging space, because you don't come from a packaging background, you wouldn't even know what those terms mean or how to do that. So there can be a lot of value in working with a third party. Tim, when we chatted a few weeks ago, You mentioned that your company, AccuFlex Packaging, invested in something called an e-beam coating line to finish their digitally printed film rolls. So tell us, first of all, what is e-beam coating and what are the advantages of this method versus the more traditional reverse printed film that is laminated?
Okay, good question. Yes, Tom O'Brien and I had a lot of discussion early on which path to go down. And E-beam stands for electron beam. And it basically is a coating that we apply over the top of our printed web. And then it goes through a chamber where it is bombarded with electrons, which basically cures it up, either a gloss coating or a matte coating, as well as a soft matte coating, and gives you a layer of protection over the top of your inks that at the end of the day can actually replace maybe one of the 3 plies in a structure or one of the 2 plies in a structure, reducing your overall film and also not impacting the integrity of your product. There's pros and cons to each, whichever path we took. The E-beam is quite expensive, but that was weighed against the fact that long term we felt we could bring packages that obviously were more sustainable by eliminating one of the films in the structure. So we went down the E-beam path, and that's where we are today.
Interesting. Now, Tim, is there any current certification around the E-beam, or is that something you see that will come in the future?
I should have mentioned the coatings are all FDA approved in terms of non-food contact. So again, we're on the outside of the package, and those are all FDA coatings are approved.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, thank you for I had not heard of the E-beam before we had the conversation. So I think it's something that people should really know about and continue to research. Mark, one of the things that procurement is often tasked with is cost savings. Procurement has targets and goals every year of money that they need to try to save for their organizations. And it sounds like there's a lot of increasing costs when it comes to packaging with tariffs and buying from overseas and increases in freight expenses. What are some strategies that companies can use today to still drive savings for this category?
Sorry, I was muted. Good question. So I think I talked about some with respect to looking in different countries, alternative sources of supply to get a better net landed cost. But what's also fascinating in this area, Sarah, is corrugated pricing, paper pricing. So we've seen at the end of last year a massive $50 per ton increase, which has put corrugated paper at the highest level that I can recall in the last 10 or 12 years. It may go up. So I want to give you a quick pointer that my partner in LA in my corrugated lead, James Jones, always tells me. Paper and corrugated suppliers, and no disrespect to Deb, because I know you've been on that, but I'm sure she'll concur. They want to sell you more paper, not less paper, right? Because that's their business, to take paper from the mill, to put it through the converter and sell it to the customer. So what we do is we look at ways through engineering to reduce the amount of paper or plastic or whatever the raw material is in a product, so we can take out cost without even negotiating price, simply by removing materials. So on my team, I have our lead designer is actually located in the Netherlands. He's 42 years in this industry. I think he has 11 patents in design and machine related. But what we've been able to do very successfully is look at a package, look at a corrugated box, for example, calculate the requirements of the corrugated box, given the supply chain, the environment, the humidity. How does it really need to perform? And then take a comprehensive look to say, hey, we can redesign it, we can take weight out, we can change the corners, we can make it stronger all the time using less paper. So in a box, in a plain brown box in high volume, 70 to 80% of the cost is the paper. If we can take out 10% of the paper, we can take out 7 or 8% of the cost. So I'll give you a real interesting example. So we had this client, again, in the West Coast doing packaged salads and fresh cut vegetables. Our designer in the Netherlands determined that the air holes on the corrugated box were too large. So when you have a large air hole or any hole in a box, it saps the strength and the performance from the box. So they just had holes that were too large. By reducing the size and the diameter of the holes, by moving them around to get them away from structural parts of the box, and then by aligning them so that each of the different SKUs had the holes in the same place and they could mix them better on the pallets, we were able to take out somewhere in the neighborhood of 14% of the weight of the box, and it actually performed better. So in that regard, they saved 10% without even negotiating price, simply by cutting down the amount of paper. Right now in this market, that is where we see probably 70% of our work, because people, especially bigger companies, have already sourced. They've bid this stuff out 10 times. They've tried to scrape off every bit of what they could get. So really, not for all companies, but for a lot of companies, the next step, which is untouched, is design and technical design. And that's where we're finding a lot of opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mark, I think that's a great point. When you think about the traditional procurement function and running an RFP, the design piece is not included because they've already come up with the design and they're having you bid on the design instead of providing creative, insightful feedback about the design.
Well, also, Sarah, the corrugated companies in many cases have contracts that read or that indicate that any value engineering savings they come up with, they keep half of the incremental savings for themselves. So there's really not as much incentive to have your corrugated supplier do this, A, because they don't want to sell you less paper, and B, if they do come up with something, you're only, the buyer is only netting half the value. And we find that to be, not repugnant, but certainly not in our client's best interest. So we work around that by being the design agent, and now they have no claim to the savings. The savings basically flow all to the client.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point, Mark. The design piece, I think, is really important, and hopefully more companies start to really assess and look at that. Tim, we have a question from the audience for you, and we've got about 2 minutes left. So after this question, we're going to wrap up the conversation today. If you have any last minute notes, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. Tim, the question is, can compostable packaging be produced with traditional laminating, or does it require electron beam? I've heard differing answers. And I'll open that up to Mark or Deb as well, if you have any thoughts or insights on that either.
To date, the compostable packaging that we have done work with have all got, or all has compostable certified adhesives. And the adhesives, in terms of the percentage of the overall structure, has to be below a certain percent before it is certified as industrial compostable or household compostable. And there is a difference. And in Europe, the films I held up earlier are both household compostable and certified industrial compostable. Here in the States, we only have a industrial compostable standard. We just haven't established one yet for household, or it's taken too long, or it's not there. So I think the answer is yes. The adhesives have to pass certain criteria before you can get that certification here, whether it's in Europe or here in the States.
All right, thank you. And again, if you have additional really specific questions about manufacturing, feel free to reach out to Tim on LinkedIn, and he can address any of those specific questions further. So I want to close out by asking each of our panelists to share the packaging innovation or trend they are most excited about for 2021. So Leanne, I'm going to go ahead and start with you.
Come back to me, please. I have to think about it.
All right, Deb, you're up.
I have two. One is Loop, old is new again. So the guys, they've got everybody from 7th generation and Tidy Cats to Gillette on board, and they're making, tins or, recyclable, reusable, not recyclable, but reusable, returnable containers. So they're putting ice cream in them, they're putting shampoo in it, you name it. And the other cool thing that's just catching on this year is the idea of selling ad space on your mailers, on your online store shippers. So folks are getting very creative, and they might have maybe something in the box if they're doing a subscription box. Maybe they sell ad space for one of the things in there. Maybe it's a coupon to buy more. There's a lot of interesting things they're doing. So that's kind of cool.
And Deb, that is an interesting idea. I used my Freebird example. I love the Freebird shoes. They could partner with, for instance, a shoe shiner company, and they could cross promote and sell space in their shipments and generate more revenue for themselves, but also partner with other companies that have great kind of innovative, sustainable products as well. So I love that idea. Mark.
I would say there's two really big trends for 21 and beyond. Number one, obviously, and I think we've touched on it, is get away from China. China's not getting better. You got to find other sources on those categories where it makes sense to go overseas. And number two, obviously, part of design, right weighting, right sizing the design, because with all these D2C shipments, a lot of times they don't have the technical capabilities to design something that fits into dim weight classification. And they can end up, by making a small reduction in the footprint of the box or the package, save significant returns in terms of how much it would have cost them to ship. So really, we think overseas and technical design with a particular focus on weight and footprint are the big trends.
All right, thanks, Mark. Leanne?
So, the first thing that comes to mind is anything environmental, eco-friendly. So there are companies, I mean, they're not even companies. Have you heard of Parlay for the Oceans? Basically what this organization does is they take fishing nets and other plastic out of the ocean, and they resell it to customers such as Adidas and so forth to repurpose them into shoes. So I think something like that is something we should look forward to in 2021 and forward.
Yeah, very cool, Leanne. Tim, we're going to round it out with you.
All right. I guess I touch on two things. One we've spoke about quite a bit today, but again, is the continued work that is being done in the area of bio-based compostable films. You will continue to see improvements and movement more and more in that direction and away from petroleum-based films, either gas or oil. And I guess the second one is just the personalization of packaging, which the digital printing presses can bring to the market. I think everybody's aware of the project that Coke did about 1.5 years ago, where they put names on all their Coke labels, right?
Yeah.
That was done digitally. I'll tell you this, was it more expensive than their traditional label? Absolutely, it was more expensive. Did they generate more sales as a result of that effort? I think they know the answer, and my guess would, yes, it did generate more sales and interest. So I think the personalization of packaging and the ability of the digital printing presses to bring that to the market is a trend that's going to continue. So.
Yeah, and Tim, I don't drink Coke. I don't actually drink anything but water, but I almost went and bought a Coke bottle with the Sarah name on it because I thought it was so cool.
Well, you didn't have to drink it. You could have just bought it.
I know. I should have displayed it.
There you go.
So we had as I close us out today, Sarah asked a question about getting contact information for the panelists. We've had a lot of questions and people really interested in the work, Leanne, Deb, Mark, and Tim, that you're doing. So Sarah, Brandon will be sending out a follow-up email with a recording and LinkedIn contact information for all the panelists, assuming they're comfortable with us sharing that to everyone. So Sarah, yes, you will get contact information and the recording. Brandon will also send out a follow-up note to everyone on LinkedIn as well with the recording and information about our panelists. So I want to give a big thank you to Leanne, Deb, Mark, and Tim for spending an hour with us today talking about what I think is one of the most exciting facets of print. I think we're going to see huge innovations and just a lot of really cool things coming from the packaging place, in particular in the sustainability, which is something that's really important to me. And I know a lot of consumers are really focused on supporting companies that have sustainable packaging. If you enjoyed the content from this series today, we are hosting a panel next Thursday at 1 Eastern Time talking about all things labels. So we talked about packaging today. Another big part of the packaging piece is labels, which are often included either on the product or on the packaging. So hope to see you next Thursday. And with that, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone.
So take care. Thank you.